The suit hung from my fingers by a thin wire hanger, a whisper of dark wool against the chipped paint of my apartment door. It was my only one, a relic from a life I was still trying to outrun, and it represented my last real chance. A final interview for a graphic design position at a firm that was, by all accounts, respectable, stable, everything I wasn't. The fabric was still warm from the press, and it carried a faint, clean scent that didn't belong in my world of turpentine and stale coffee. It smelled of lavender and steam and quiet competence. It smelled of him, Mr. Julian Thorne. He wasn't just the owner of Thorne & Sons Fine Garment Care. He was the establishment itself. A man who seemed as pressed and meticulously maintained as the silks and cashmeres that passed through his hands. I'd been taking my meager dry cleaning to him for the 6 months I'd lived in this neighborhood, always dropping it off with the smiling young woman at the counter. But this time, for the suit, he had been there himself. He'd taken the garment from me with a gravity usually reserved for museum artifacts. His hands, I noticed then, were not soft. They were strong, with clean, squared-off nails, the hands of a man who understood the mechanics of his work, not just the management of it. He ran a thumb along the lapel, his gaze distant, analytical. He was older than me, maybe by 20 years, with silver threading through his dark hair at the temples and fine lines around his eyes that spoke of careful observation, not laughter. "This is a good piece of wool," he'd said, his voice a low, calm baritone that seemed to absorb the frantic energy I carried into his shop. "It's held its shape well?" I just nodded, my throat tight. The suit was second-hand, a lucky find from a consignment shop years ago, and his validation of it felt like a validation of me. A foolish thought, but I held on to it. He'd found the small tear in the lining near the cuff, a fraying I hadn't even noticed. "I'll have my tailor take a look at this," he'd said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. No charge. A garment like this deserves proper care, and when I'd come to pick it up today, he was there again. He'd insisted I try it on, to ensure the small repair was satisfactory. He held the jacket for me, his presence behind me a solid, steady warmth. As I slipped my arms into the sleeves, his palms settled on my shoulders, just for a moment. They weren't heavy, but they had a weight that seemed to travel straight down my spine, grounding me. His fingers lingered, adjusting the collar, smoothing a non-existent wrinkle from the back. The touch was professional, precise, and yet it felt like the most profound physical contact I'd had in years. It was a soft gravity, pulling me into an orbit of quiet consideration that felt both terrifying and deeply comforting. Now, sitting on the edge of my lumpy mattress, I stared at the suit. The interview was tomorrow morning. My future, or at least the next chapter of it, depended on my ability to project an image of the man who deserved to wear this suit, an image of someone as calm and capable as the man who had just fixed it. But all I could feel was the ghost of his hands on my shoulders, a warmth that had nothing to do with the steam press and everything to do with a connection I had no right to imagine. My life was a carefully constructed fortress of solitude. After my last relationship imploded, taking my business and my self-worth with it, I had rebuilt myself on a foundation of minimal risk. Small apartment, freelance work that paid just enough, no attachments. It was a safe, gray existence. Julian Thorne, with his quiet dignity and the subtle scent of lavender that clung to him, was a splash of unexpected color. A dangerous variable. I ran a finger over the mended cuff. The stitches were invisible, perfect. An act of kindness, of professional pride. That's all it was. It had to be. To think anything else was to invite a kind of hope that my life, in its current state, simply couldn't sustain. I was a struggling artist with one good suit. He was a man who had built an empire on making things perfect. We didn't occupy the same world. I was just a customer passing through his. But as I hung the suit carefully on the back of the door, the memory of his gaze returned. He hadn't just looked at the garment. He had looked at me. His eyes, a deep, thoughtful gray, had held mine for a beat too long, and in them, I'd seen not pity, but something else. A quiet assessment. A flicker of recognition. Or maybe, I told myself, I was just lonely. The next morning, the suit felt different. It felt like armor. Walking into the sterile, glass-walled office for the interview, I moved with a confidence that wasn't entirely my own. I could almost feel the steadying weight of Julian's hands on my shoulders, a silent endorsement. The interview went well. The questions were standard, my portfolio was solid, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like an imposter. I felt like a professional. I didn't get the job. The email was polite, generic. A highly competitive pool of applicants. I read it 3 times, the words blurring. The armor dissolved, leaving me in the too quiet space of my apartment. The scent of lavender, now a mocking reminder of a confidence I had only borrowed. The disappointment was a familiar, bitter taste. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the hope. The brief, shining possibility of a life that was more than just getting by. My first instinct was to crawl back into my shell, to retreat into the gray safety of my routine. But a strange, insistent thought pushed through the gloom. I had to return the hanger. It was a high-quality wooden one, embossed with the gold Thorn and Sons crest, not the cheap wire ones for shirts. It felt wrong to keep it. It was an excuse, I knew, but it was the only one I had. Walking back to the shop felt like a walk of shame. I was wearing my usual jeans and a faded t-shirt, the failed suit hanging in my closet like a judgment. The bell over the door chimed, a delicate, welcoming sound that felt entirely out of place with my mood. The young woman was at the counter, but before she could speak, Julian emerged from the back, carrying a cascade of pale blue silk over his arm. He stopped when he saw me. His expression didn't change, but his eyes did that thing again, that quiet, focused assessment. He carefully hung the silk dress on a rolling rack before turning his full attention to me. "Ethan," he said. My name, in his low voice, sounded solid. Real. I had only told it to him once. "Mr. Thorne," I managed, holding out the hanger. "I just wanted to return this." He took it from me, his fingers brushing mine. A spark, faint but undeniable. He looked from the hanger to my face, and his brow furrowed slightly. "How was the interview?" The question was so direct, so simple, it disarmed me. I couldn't muster the energy for a polite lie. I didn't get it. The words came out flat, stripped of emotion. He held my gaze, and I saw that flicker again. Not pity, empathy. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said, and I believed him. He didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. He just stood there, in the quiet, clean-smelling space, and acknowledged my failure. It was, strangely, more comforting than any kind word would have been. He gestured toward a small, upholstered bench near the window. "Do you have a moment?" I hesitated. My fortress of solitude was calling to me, promising the numb comfort of isolation. But I found myself nodding, walking over to the bench and sitting down. The shop was an oasis of calm. The air hummed with the gentle rhythm of the pressing machines in the back, a steady, industrial heartbeat. Sunlight streamed through the large front window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, silent stars. Julian didn't sit. He leaned against the counter, a few feet away, creating a space that was both shared and respectful of my own. He wasn't crowding me. He was simply present. "That firm," he began, his voice measured. "They have a reputation for a certain aesthetic. Very corporate. Very clean." He paused, looking at the worn portfolio case I still carried from this morning. "Your work has more soul than that." I looked up, surprised. "How would you know?" A small, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "You came in here once, a few months ago, to ask about cleaning a canvas you'd spilled coffee on. You had your sketchbook with you. You were drawing the gas lamp across the street." He tilted his head. "You have a good eye for light and shadow. For character. That's not what they're looking for. They want logos that can be shrunk for a letterhead." I was stunned into silence. I remembered that day. I'd been embarrassed, flustered about the ruined canvas. I hadn't thought anyone, least of all him, had paid me any attention at all. To realize I had been seen, truly seen and remembered, sent a slow, creeping warmth through my chest. "It was just a sketch," I mumbled, feeling my cheeks flush. "It was good," he said simply, as if stating a fact of nature, like the sky being blue. He pushed off the counter and walked toward the back of the shop. "Wait here a moment." He returned with 2 mugs, the steam rising from them carrying the scent of Earl Grey tea. He handed one to me. Our fingers brushed again, longer this time. The warmth of the ceramic seeped into my cold hands. I looked down at the mug, a simple, heavy piece of white porcelain. It felt good to hold. Solid. He took a sip from his own, his eyes never leaving my face. "A rejection is not a reflection of your talent, Ethan. It's a reflection of compatibility." You wouldn't have been happy there. I wanted to argue, to say that happiness was a luxury I couldn't afford, that a steady paycheck was all that mattered. But looking at him, at the quiet certainty in his gaze, the words died in my throat. He spoke of my talent as if it were a tangible thing, a known quantity. He had seen a piece of me I thought was invisible and had deemed it valuable. We sat in silence for a few minutes, drinking our tea. The silence wasn't awkward. It was companionable, filled by the gentle hum of the shop. It felt like a sanctuary, a place where my failure didn't have to define me. When I finished, I placed the empty mug on the small table beside the bench. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne, for the tea. And for this, Julian," he corrected me gently. "My name is Julian, Julian," I repeated. The name felt different on my tongue, more personal, an invitation. As I stood to leave, he spoke again. "I have a small project, if you're interested. It's not a career, just a few weeks of work. I'm updating the branding for the shop. The original logo was my grandfather's. It's time for something new, but I wanted to respect the history." He paused, his gaze steady. "I'd like to see what you could do with it. I would pay your standard freelance rate." Of course, the offer hung in the air between us, shimmering with possibility. It was an act of charity, I thought at first, a gesture of pity, but his expression held no trace of it. It was a straightforward business proposition, delivered with a quiet respect that made it impossible to refuse without seeming churlish. He wasn't offering me a handout. He was offering me a job, a chance to use the very talent he had just validated. My internal fortress, the one I had so carefully constructed, suddenly felt less like a shelter and more like a cage. A door was opening. A small one, perhaps, but it was opening nonetheless. And for the first time in a very long time, I considered stepping through it. "I'd like that," I heard myself say, the words feeling both foreign and absolutely right. "I'd like that very much." The next week was a strange and dizzying blur of hope and anxiety. I started the project for Julian, working from my cramped apartment, the initial sketches spread out over my floor. The work was a lifeline, not just financially, but creatively. It was the first time in years I'd felt a genuine spark of excitement for a project. Thorne & Sons wasn't just a business, it was a legacy. I spent hours in the local library, researching the history of the neighborhood, looking at old photographs of the storefront, trying to capture the essence of what Julian's grandfather had built and what Julian himself had so carefully preserved. I saw him every other day, bringing in concepts, discussing typefaces and color palettes. Our meetings took place in his small, immaculate office at the back of the shop. It was as ordered and calm as the man himself, smelling of old paper, leather, and the same faint hint of lavender. He would sit behind a large oak desk, but when I unrolled my sketches, he would come around to stand beside me, his proximity a familiar, grounding warmth. He was an excellent client, perceptive, decisive, with a clear vision but also a deep respect for my expertise. He listened more than he spoke, his gray eyes focused intently on my work. He would point to a detail, a curve in a letter form, and ask a question that showed he was truly seeing it, understanding the thought process behind it. During one of these meetings, as I was explaining my choice of a deep, heritage blue, I gestured toward the sketch and my hand brushed his. It was an accident, a fleeting contact, but the air thickened around it. I pulled my hand back quickly, my heart hammering against my ribs. He didn't move. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable, and then his gaze dropped to my work again as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. The professional boundary between us, once so clear, had become blurred. The space between us was now charged with an unspoken tension, a quiet hum of awareness that was both exhilarating and terrifying. I started to analyze his every action, his every word, searching for meaning. A pause before he spoke. The way his gaze would soften when he thought I wasn't looking. A small smile when I made a dry, self-deprecating joke. These were tiny things, scraps of evidence I gathered and poured over in the solitude of my apartment. I was building a case for a hope I was too afraid to name. The power dynamic between us was a constant, nagging worry. He was my client. He was wealthy, established. I was living week to week, dependent on this project to pay my rent. The imbalance felt like a chasm between us. Was I misreading kindness for interest? Was I projecting my own loneliness onto a man who was simply being a decent employer? The fear of getting it wrong, of embarrassing myself and destroying this fragile professional relationship, was a cold weight in my stomach. One afternoon, I brought in what I felt was the final design. It incorporated the classic, elegant feel of the old logo with a modern, clean sensibility. I was proud of it. I felt it was the best work I had done in years. I unrolled the presentation board on his desk. He leaned over it, his shoulder brushing mine. I held my breath, acutely aware of the clean scent of his shirt, the solid presence of him beside me. He studied the design for a long time, his silence stretching my nerves taut. Finally, he straightened up and looked at me. "It's perfect," he said, his voice quiet with what sounded like genuine admiration. "It's exactly what I hoped for." Better, the relief that washed over me was so intense it made me dizzy. "I'm glad you like it, I do," he said, his eyes holding mine. "Ethan, this is exceptional work." He reached out and placed a hand on my shoulder, in the exact same spot he had touched when I tried on the suit. This time, however, it wasn't a fleeting, professional adjustment. His hand rested there, his thumb stroking the fabric of my t-shirt just once. A deliberate, considered touch. The weight of it was immense. It was a statement. My mind went blank. All the analysis, all the fear, all the overthinking, it all just stopped. There was only the warmth of his hand, the intensity of his gaze, and the quiet hum of the machines in the background. This is real. The thought was a sudden, clear bell in the fog of my uncertainty. This is not in my head. He seemed to be waiting for a reaction, for me to pull away or lean in. The choice was mine. The power, in that moment, felt surprisingly balanced. His touch was a question, not a demand. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just stood there, letting the warmth of his hand seep into me, a silent acceptance of the gesture. After a long moment, he gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze and then let his hand drop. The absence of his touch was as potent as its presence had been. "I'll have my bank transfer the final payment this afternoon," he said, his voice a little thicker than usual. He was all business again, but the shift felt protective, as if he were giving me an escape route, a way to retreat back to the safety of our professional roles if I needed it. "Thank you," I said, my own voice barely a whisper. I started to roll up the design, my hands trembling slightly. "Leave it," he said. "I'd like to look at it for a while." I nodded, gathered my other things, and walked toward the door of his office. My hand was on the knob when his voice stopped me. "Ethan," I turned. He was standing by the desk, his hands in his pockets, looking at me with an expression of quiet vulnerability that I had never seen on him before. "There's a community arts festival this weekend," he said. "Thorne & Sons is a sponsor. We have a small booth. I could use a hand setting up on Saturday morning. And I could use the company." It wasn't a job offer this time. It was an invitation. A clear, unambiguous step across the line we had been so carefully towing. The fortress was crumbling. The door was wide open now, and on the other side was Julian, waiting. I met his gaze, my heart a frantic, hopeful drum against my ribs. "What time?" I asked. Saturday arrived with a cool, bright morning that felt full of promise. I met Julian at the shop, and we loaded a few boxes and a folded canopy tent into the back of his impeccably clean, dark green pickup truck. It was strange seeing him in a casual polo shirt and worn-in jeans, but the change suited him. It made him seem more accessible, less like the formidable Mr. Thorne and more like the man who drank Earl Grey tea from a simple white mug. The festival was being set up in the main town square, a lovely old park with a cast-iron fountain at its center. The air was buzzing with the cheerful chaos of artists and vendors setting up their booths, the sounds of clanking metal poles and friendly chatter filling the morning. Working together was easy, companionable. We fell into a natural rhythm, unfolding the tent, securing the legs, and setting up the small table with pamphlets and a bowl of lavender sachets. There was a simple, grounding pleasure in the shared physical task. It was a different kind of proximity than our office meetings, less charged with unspoken tension and more rooted in simple cooperation. At one point, as we were unfurling a large banner with the new logo I designed, our hands met on the canvas. Neither of us pulled away. For a few seconds, our fingers were interlaced, a silent, shared moment of connection amidst the bustling park. He looked at me, a soft smile playing on his lips, and I smiled back, a genuine, unburdened smile. It felt good. It felt right. Once the booth was set up, we had time to wander. He bought us coffee from a local vendor, and we walked through the rows of tents, looking at paintings, pottery, and handmade jewelry. He moved with a quiet, unhurried grace, and I found myself matching my steps to his. He would stop to speak with some of the artists, his questions thoughtful and his compliments sincere. It was clear he was a respected member of this community, not just a wealthy benefactor. As we stood looking at a series of beautiful, moody landscape photographs, he turned to me. "You should have a booth here next year," he said, his tone matter of fact. I gave a short, bitter laugh. "With what? I can barely afford the canvas, let alone the entry fee for something like this." His expression softened. "That can change," he said quietly. "Talent like yours finds a way." Or, he added, his gaze direct, "sometimes it just needs a little help creating the space for it to flourish." The implication was clear, and my old fears resurfaced, prickling at the edges of our easy camaraderie. The chasm of our financial differences yawned between us again. I must have tensed, because his face fell slightly. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low. "That was presumptuous. I don't mean to. I know you're independent. I respect that." Deeply, he looked away for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "I worry, sometimes, that my position makes things complicated. That any offer of help might be misinterpreted as an attempt to control or to create an obligation." It was a moment of startling vulnerability. He was admitting his own uncertainty, his own fear of the power imbalance that I had been so obsessed with. He was showing me his side of the chasm, and in doing so, he was making it seem a little less wide. He was building a bridge. "I know you do," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "I know you respect my independence." I paused, taking a breath. "And I worry, too, that I'll be seen as someone taking advantage." We stood there, amidst the cheerful noise of the festival, finally putting the unspoken anxiety into words. It felt like a confession, a clearing of the air. The honesty of the moment was more intimate than any touch had been. "For what it's worth," he said, meeting my eyes again, his own gaze clear and steady, "I have never, for one second, thought that about you." A knot of tension I hadn't even realized I was carrying loosened in my chest. I believed him. Just then, a sharp, familiar voice cut through the air. "Ethan? Ethan Miller, is that you?" I turned, my stomach twisting. It was Sarah Gable, a woman who had been a peripheral friend of my ex-partner. She was a notorious gossip, with a smile as bright and hard as polished glass. She was looking from me to Julian, her eyes alight with a predatory curiosity. "Sarah," I said, my voice tight. "What a surprise, I'll say," she said, her gaze sweeping over Julian in a way that was both admiring and dismissive. "I haven't seen you since, well, you know. It's good to see you've landed on your feet." She gestured vaguely at Julian. "And with such distinguished company. Mr. Thorne, isn't it? You handle my husband's suits." The implication was clear and ugly. She was framing me as a kept man, a charity case taken in by the wealthy dry cleaner. The shame was a hot flush that crawled up my neck. My old insecurities came roaring back, and my instinct was to shrink, to stammer out an explanation, to put distance between myself and Julian. But before I could say a word, Julian stepped slightly forward, placing himself subtly at my side. He extended a hand to her, his smile polite but cool. "Mr. Thorne, yes. It's a pleasure." He didn't release her hand immediately, his grip firm, commanding her attention. Then he turned his head and looked at me, a warm, unmistakable pride in his eyes. "Ethan was just telling me about his plans to exhibit here next year. His design work is truly remarkable. I feel very fortunate to have been one of his recent clients." He said it so smoothly, with such unshakable confidence, that it completely reframed the narrative. He hadn't introduced me as a friend, or an employee, or anything vague. He had named me as a professional peer, a talented designer. He had used his own status not to elevate himself, but to shield and elevate me. He had taken her petty, venomous dart and melted it into nothing. Sarah Gable was momentarily speechless. She withdrew her hand, her bright smile faltering. "Oh," she said. "Well, that's lovely." Julian then placed a light, deliberate hand on the small of my back. It was a gesture of possession, but not of ownership. It was a gesture of alliance, of solidarity. It said, simply, "We are together in this." He gave Sarah another polite nod. "If you'll excuse us, we were just about to get some lunch." He guided me away, his hand a steady, warm pressure against my back, leaving her standing there amidst the pottery and paintings. We walked in silence for a few paces, my mind reeling. The public nature of his touch, of his defense, had shattered any remaining ambiguity. This was no longer a private, tentative exploration. He had made a public declaration, however subtle. He had claimed me, not as a possession, but as a partner. When we were on the other side of the fountain, away from the crowds, he stopped and turned to me, his hand falling from my back. His expression was serious, concerned. "Are you all right? I'm sorry if I overstepped." I looked at him, at this steady, quiet man who had just stood up for me in a way no one ever had before. The last remnants of my fortress, the final bricks of my self-imposed isolation, crumbled into dust. "You didn't overstep," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. It was gratitude and relief and a deep, soaring affection. "Thank you." The air between us was electric, charged with everything that had just happened, with everything that had been building for weeks. The noise of the festival faded into a distant hum. There was only the sound of the fountain, the sunlight on our faces, and the momentous weight of the unspoken thing that was finally, undeniably, out in the open. He took a small step closer. "Ethan," he began, his voice low and earnest. "What I said to her about being fortunate to be your client, it was the truth. But it's not the whole truth." He took a breath, his gaze unwavering. "The truth is, I enjoy your company more than I can properly explain. I have, from the first day you walked into my shop looking so worried about that old suit." My breath caught in my throat. This was it. The breaking point. The moment of confession. "I've hesitated," he continued, "because of the differences in our circumstances, in our ages. The last thing I would ever want is for you to feel pressured or dependent. Your spirit, your independence, that's part of what I admire so much about you." He paused, and a look of profound vulnerability crossed his face. "But I can't pretend any longer that my interest in you is purely professional or even platonic. It isn't." He laid it all out, every fear I'd had, every concern about the power dynamic, and he addressed it with honesty and respect. He was giving me all the power, laying his own heart bare, and letting me decide what to do with it. It was my turn to be brave. "I feel the same way," I said, the words rushing out on a wave of pure, liberating relief. "Julian, I haven't been able to think about much else." I let out a shaky laugh. "I thought I was imagining it all. I was afraid." "What were you afraid of?" he asked gently. "Of this," I admitted, gesturing between us. "Of the imbalance. Of what people like her would think. Of getting it wrong." And now, I looked into his kind, steady eyes. I thought of the mended suit, the cups of tea, the hand on my shoulder, the quiet defense by the fountain. All the small, careful acts of protection and care. He hadn't tried to fix my life. He had simply created a safe space for me to fix it myself. He hadn't used his resources to indebt me, but to empower me. "Now," I said, my voice firm and clear, "I'm not afraid anymore." A slow, beautiful smile spread across his face, transforming his usually serious features. It reached his eyes, crinkling the corners, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. He lifted his hand, his movements slow, deliberate, giving me every chance to pull away. He cupped my cheek, his thumb stroking my skin. The touch was feather-light, reverent. "Good," he whispered, and then he leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a kiss of fiery, desperate passion. It was a kiss of arrival. It was warm and soft and breathtakingly tender. It tasted of coffee and sunlight and the sweet, clean scent that was uniquely his. It was a kiss that held weeks of unspoken longing, of careful observation, of shared vulnerability. It was unhurried, a perfect meeting of equals, a mutual and unmistakable confirmation. Everything in me that had been tense and guarded for years finally, blessedly, let go. When we parted, he didn't move away. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. I could feel his breath on my lips, warm and steady. I brought my hand up to cover his, which was still holding my face, and laced our fingers together. It felt like coming home. A home I hadn't even known I was searching for. The sounds of the festival slowly filtered back in, the distant music, the chatter of the crowd. But here, in our small bubble by the fountain, the world was perfectly, exquisitely still. We had found our quiet center. Together, we spent the rest of the afternoon in a sort of dreamlike haze. We walked, we talked, we held hands. The simple, public act of it felt both revolutionary and completely natural. I felt seen in a way I never had before, not as an object of speculation, but as one half of a whole. Julian's presence at my side was a quiet, solid reassurance. He didn't seem to notice or care about the occasional curious glance we received. He was focused only on me, his attention a warm and welcome weight. When the festival began to wind down, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the park, he helped me pack up my portfolio and the leftover materials from the morning. We worked in a comfortable silence, the earlier rhythm of cooperation now layered with a new, deeper intimacy. As we drove back to the shop in his truck, a sliver of my old anxiety began to creep back in. The day had been perfect, almost impossibly so. A pocket of time outside of reality. But what happened now? What did the morning after this perfect day look like? The differences between our lives were still there. His beautiful, ordered shop and the quiet, elegant apartment I imagined was above it. My cramped, chaotic studio, with its paint-stained floor and precarious finances. The kiss hadn't erased those realities. He seemed to sense the shift in my mood. As he pulled the truck into the alley behind the shop, he cut the engine and turned to me. The cab of the truck was filled with the soft, golden light of dusk. "You've gone quiet," he observed gently. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Just thinking," I said. "About what comes next." He nodded, his expression understanding. He didn't offer easy platitudes. He gave my thoughts the respect of his silence, letting me find the words. I struggled to articulate the enormity of the day. "This was wonderful, Julian. But my life is messy, complicated. And yours is so not." He considered this for a moment. "My life is ordered," he corrected softly. "That's not the same as being uncomplicated. I've had my own messes, Ethan. They just happened a long time ago." He reached across the console and took my hand, his grip warm and firm. "I'm not looking for perfection. I'm looking for you." The simple, direct honesty of his words was a balm to my frayed nerves. He wasn't afraid of my mess. He wasn't trying to tidy me up like one of the garments in his shop. He was choosing to see me, all of me, and he wasn't turning away. "I want to do this right," he continued, his thumb tracing circles on the back of my hand. "With care. I want us to build something, not rush into it. We can take this at whatever pace you're comfortable with. There are no expectations." He was, once again, handing the power back to me. He was ensuring I knew I was in control of my own choices, that this was a partnership, not a takeover. I squeezed his hand. "I want that too," I said, my voice clear and sure. "I want to build something with you." He brought my hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to my knuckles. "Good," he said, his smile returning. "Then let's start with dinner. I was thinking we could cook. My place, unless you'd rather not." The thought of his home, the private space I had only imagined, was both intimidating and deeply alluring. It was the next step, a step into his world. But he had made it feel like a simple invitation, not a test. "I'd love that," I said. His apartment was, as I had suspected, above the shop. We entered through a private door in the back, climbing a solid, wooden staircase. The space was beautiful, but not in an ostentatious way. It was filled with dark wood, comfortable-looking furniture, shelves of books, and a few carefully chosen pieces of art. It was clean and ordered, yes, but it was also warm and lived in. It felt like him. The kitchen was spacious and modern, but with a classic, functional feel. He handed me a glass of wine and put on some quiet jazz music. As we chopped vegetables side by side, I felt the last of my unease melt away. This was easy. This was comfortable. The domesticity of the moment didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a relief. It was a quiet intimacy that was, in its own way, more profound than the kiss in the park. We ate at a small table by a large window that overlooked the quiet street. We talked for hours. He told me about taking over the family business after his father passed away, his initial reluctance, and how he had grown to love the craft of it, the quiet satisfaction of restoring something beautiful. I told him about my failed design agency, the bad partnership that had left me broke and disillusioned, and my slow journey back to trusting my own creative instincts. He listened with an attentiveness that made me feel like the most interesting person in the world. He didn't judge my failures or offer unsolicited advice. He just listened and understood. After dinner, we sat on his comfortable sofa, the city lights twinkling outside the window. He put his arm around me, and I leaned my head on his shoulder, breathing in his familiar, clean scent. I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a feeling of rightness that was so profound it almost brought me to tears. I didn't stay the night. We both seemed to understand, without needing to say it, that it was too soon. We were building a foundation, and it needed to be built carefully, with patience and respect. When he walked me to the door, he kissed me again, a long, deep, searching kiss that left me breathless and wanting more. "I'll call you tomorrow," he said, his hand lingering on my waist. "I'll answer," I promised. Walking home through the quiet streets, the world felt new. The air was crisper, the stars brighter. I felt a lightness in my step, a hope in my heart that was no longer fragile and tentative, but strong and resilient. The next morning, I woke up to a text from him. "Good morning. Thinking of you." A simple message, but it sent a thrill through me. A few hours later, a second message arrived. It was a link to the application for a local arts grant, one specifically designed to help emerging artists mount their first solo show. The deadline was in a month. Beneath the link, he had written, "You should do this. I'm happy to help with the application, if you like. Just as a friend." I stared at the message, my heart swelling. He hadn't offered to pay for it. He hadn't tried to solve my problem with his money. He had found an opportunity, a path for me to walk on my own 2 feet, and had offered his support, his time, his belief in me. He was tending to my future, not trying to buy it. I thought of his words from the day before. Sometimes talent just needs a little help creating the space for it to flourish. He wasn't just saying it. He was doing it. He was helping me create my own space. A few days later, we were having coffee at a small cafe when Mrs. Gable walked in. She saw us, her eyes widening for a fraction of a second before her polite, plastic smile snapped into place. My old instinct was to tense up, to prepare for a defense. But then I felt Julian's hand cover mine on the table, a simple, grounding touch. I looked at him, and he gave me a small, reassuring nod. I turned back to Mrs. Gable, met her curious gaze without flinching, and offered her a calm, confident smile of my own. She gave a brisk nod and moved on to the counter. It was a small moment, a tiny test, but we had passed it. Together, we hadn't needed to say a word. The quiet strength of our connection was its own defense, its own statement. Later that week, as I was leaving his apartment, he stopped me at the door. He pressed a small, cool object into my hand. It was a key, not to his apartment, but to the back door of the shop. "So you can come and go when you're working on the grant application," he said, before I could protest. "The light in my office is better than in your place. And the Wi-Fi is faster." He looked at me, his expression earnest. "It's not a key to my life, Ethan. It's just a key to a quiet room. A space. For you." I closed my hand around the key, the metal warm against my skin. A key to a space. That's what he had been giving me all along. Space to breathe. Space to fail. Space to create. Space to be myself. I looked from the key in my hand to the man standing in front of me. This steady, patient, honorable man. He hadn't rescued me. He had simply opened a door and trusted me to have the strength to walk through it on my own. The foundation felt solid. It felt real. It was built not on grand gestures or passionate declarations, but on small, consistent acts of care, on mutual respect, on a quiet, profound understanding. I spent the next few weeks working on the grant application in his office after hours. Sometimes he would be there, working quietly at his own desk. Other times, I would be alone, surrounded by the comforting, orderly silence of his world. But I never felt like an intruder. I felt welcome. The space was beginning to feel like a second home. Our relationship unfolded at its own, unhurried pace. We cooked dinners. We went for long walks. We talked about everything and nothing. We learned the rhythms of each other's days, the small habits and preferences that make a person who they are. The physical side of our relationship deepened as well, slowly, tenderly. Each new step a mutual decision, an exploration built on trust. One Saturday morning, I let myself into the shop with my key. I had an idea for the final piece of my grant portfolio and wanted to sketch it out while the light was good. I expected the place to be empty, but as I walked toward the office, I heard the gentle hum of one of the machines. I found Julian in the main workroom, standing over a large, flat press. He was concentrating on a delicate, antique lace wedding veil, his movements precise and focused. He looked up as I entered, and a slow, warm smile spread across his face. "You're here early," he said. "Inspiration struck," I replied, leaning against the doorframe, just watching him. He finished what he was doing, turned off the machine, and came over to me. He wiped his hands on a clean cloth and then gently cupped my face, tilting it up to his. "Good morning," he said, and kissed me, a soft, familiar kiss that felt as essential as breathing. As we stood there, in the quiet heart of his business, surrounded by the tools of his trade and the scent of lavender and steam, I felt a profound sense of peace. My world, once so gray and small, had been filled with color and warmth. The messy, chaotic artist and the quiet, ordered businessman. We were so different, and yet we fit. I looked around the room, at the racks of beautiful clothes waiting to be cared for, at the steady, capable man holding me, and I realized something. Love wasn't about finding someone who erased your problems or fixed your flaws. It was about finding someone who created a safe enough space for you to do it yourself. It was about finding someone who saw the best version of you and quietly, patiently, waited for you to see it too. Julian's wealth and his age, the things I had once seen as insurmountable barriers, were now just part of the context of our story. They weren't a cage, they were simply part of the landscape. The real foundation we were building had nothing to do with money or status. It was made of much stronger stuff: trust, respect, and a quiet, steady, and deeply reassuring care. I was no longer just a man with a single suit. I was an artist with a future, and I was standing in the arms of a man who felt, in every possible way, like home. The fear was gone. In its place, something new and sturdy had settled. A quiet foundation. A hope that felt as real and solid as the key in my pocket. A new beginning. What moment in our story stayed with you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of quiet connection resonated with you, a like would be greatly appreciated and helps others find our channel. For more slow burn male/male love stories told with warmth and care, please subscribe. We're so glad to have you here.